It's 2:47 a.m., March 1961, Los Angeles. The red recording light is still glowing in a small private studio on Sunset Boulevard. Frank Sinatra sits alone in the engineer's booth, a cigarette burning down to ash between his fingers. He hasn't moved in 20 minutes. On the mixing console in front of him sits a single reel of tape, unmarked, unlabeled, but Frank knows exactly what's on it. 3 voices, 1 conversation, and enough truth to destroy a presidency before it even begins. The phone on the wall has been ringing for the past hour. Frank hasn't answered it. He knows who's calling. He knows what they want. They want the tape. And what Frank Sinatra does in the next 60 minutes will cost him more than any contract, any friendship, any love affair ever could. It will cost him the thing he values most, the truth about who he really is. To understand why Frank Sinatra was sitting in that studio, holding a tape that could shake the foundations of American power, you need to go back 18 months. You need to understand what Frank had become by 1960. He wasn't just a singer anymore. He was a kingmaker. The 1960 presidential election had been the closest in American history. John F. Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon by a margin so thin you could slip a playing card through it. And whispers in Washington, in Hollywood, in the smoke-filled back rooms of Chicago, all pointed to one man who had helped tip the scales, Francis Albert Sinatra. Frank had campaigned for Kennedy like his life depended on it. He'd organized rallies, raised millions, called in favors from people whose names you didn't say out loud. He'd introduced Jack to certain associates in Chicago, associates who knew how to make votes appear in precincts where they were needed most. By January 1961, when Kennedy took the oath of office, Frank believed he had earned something. Not money, not fame. He had those already. He believed he had earned access, trust, a seat at the table of real power. But power is a jealous thing, and the men who protect it don't like witnesses. The recording studio on Sunset was called Pacific Sound. Frank had invested in it quietly, a place where he could work without the circus of the major labels. It had the best equipment money could buy, including something Frank had installed himself, a hidden recording system in the main lounge. He'd installed it for protection. In his world, conversations were currency. You never knew when you might need proof of what someone had promised you or threatened you with. On the night of February 14th, 1961, Valentine's Day, Frank had hosted a private meeting at Pacific Sound. 3 men, closed doors. What they discussed was never supposed to leave that room. But Frank's hidden system had captured every word. By March 1961, Frank Sinatra was at war with himself. On the surface, he was untouchable. His albums were selling millions. His films were box office gold. He had the ear of the President of the United States. But underneath the silk suits and the easy smile, Frank was burning. The Kennedy administration was distancing itself from him. Bobby Kennedy, the new Attorney General, had made it clear that Frank's associations were an embarrassment. The same connections that had helped win the election were now a liability. Frank's assistant, a quiet man named George Jacobs, noticed the change. He stopped sleeping. Jacobs would later recall, he'd sit up all night, drinking, playing the same records over and over. He was waiting for something, or dreading it. The tape from February 14th had revealed something Frank never expected to hear. A conversation between a Kennedy aide, a man connected to certain Chicago interests, and a third voice Frank knew all too well. They were discussing contingencies, arrangements, what to do if certain information ever became public. They were discussing how to handle Frank Sinatra if he ever became a problem. Frank had listened to that tape 17 times. Each time, his jaw tightened a little more. These were men he had trusted, men he had believed were his friends, and they were calmly, methodically planning how to silence him if necessary. Now someone had discovered the tape existed, and they wanted it back. The first warning came on March 8th. Frank was at the Sands in Las Vegas, preparing for a show, when a man in a gray suit appeared backstage. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Frank recognized the type, government, the kind that didn't carry badges. "Mr. Sinatra," the man said, There's concern about certain recordings that may have been made at a facility you own in Los Angeles. It would be in everyone's best interest if those recordings were returned to the appropriate parties. Frank lit a cigarette. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. The man smiled. But if such recordings existed, and if they were to surface, it would be very unfortunate for everyone involved, including you. Frank stepped closer, close enough that the man had to look up. Let me tell you something, pal. I've been threatened by guys who make you look like a school teacher. Get out of my dressing room. The second warning came 4 days later. Frank's accounts were frozen. Tax audits initiated. No explanation. The third warning was more personal. On March 15th, a photograph arrived. No return address. Just his daughter Nancy walking to school, taken with a telephoto lens. Frank stared at that photograph. His hand began to shake. Not from fear, from rage. He picked up the phone, called his ex-wife. Get Nancy out of town. Now, don't ask questions. Then, called a man in Chicago. Then, a security firm. On March 18th, Dean Martin called. Frank, whatever you've got, whatever you're holding on to, it's not worth it. You know what's not worth it, Dino? Being somebody's puppet. Being used and thrown away like a dirty napkin. That night, he drove to Pacific Sound alone. The studio is dark, except for the glow of the recording equipment. Frank sits alone, the tape reel in his hands. There's a knock at the door. Soft, patient, the knock of someone who knows they'll be let in eventually. Frank doesn't move. The knock comes again. It's open, he finally says. A man enters, mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of face you forget immediately after seeing it. He takes a seat across from Frank without being invited. Mr. Sinatra, I was hoping we could resolve this quietly. Who sent you? Boing. Who sent you? Who sent you? Does it matter? We both know what's on that tape. We both know what happens if it becomes public. Frank stands up slowly. He walks toward the man, stopping inches from his face. You think I'm afraid of you? You think your little games scare me? The man doesn't flinch. I think you're a practical man. I'm a Sinatra. We don't do practical. Frank laughs, but there's no humor in it. I've got copies of this tape in 3 locations. A lawyer in Switzerland with instructions. Friends who make your bosses look like traffic cops. I'm sure you do. And you've thought about what happens next. Not to you, to your daughter, to everyone around you. The man pauses. We just want the tape. Frank turns away, walking to the window. He stares out at the empty street. When he speaks again, his voice is different, quieter, colder. You know what kills me? I believed in them. I believed in Jack. I believed we were building something. And this whole time, I was just a useful idiot. A crooner with mob friends who could deliver votes. Politics is complicated. Frank spins around. Don't give me that. Politics is simple. You use people and you throw them away. That's all it's ever been. He walks back to the tape machine. I could release this tape. I could burn the whole thing down. And you know what? Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to watch them scramble. But Frank picks up the tape. He turns it over in his hands. But I'm tired. I'm tired of being the guy who fights. I'm tired of being the guy who has to prove he's tough. He looks at the man with something that isn't fear. It's disgust. Pure, undiluted disgust. You people aren't worth my war. You're not worth my family's safety. You're not worth another minute of my time. He walks to the tape machine and threads the reel onto the player. His finger hovers over the erase button. You want to know something? I'm not doing this because you scared me. I'm doing this because you showed me what I really am to you people. Nothing. A tool. A convenience. He presses the button. The tape begins to spin. So take your tape, take your secrets, and choke on them. When it's done, Frank removes the reel and throws it at the man. It hits his chest and falls to the floor. Pick it up yourself and get out of my studio. The man bends down, retrieves the tape. He walks to the door, then pauses. For what it's worth, Mr. Sinatra, I'm sorry. You deserved better from the people you helped. Frank laughs, a harsh, bitter sound. Save your apologies. I don't want your pity. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to remember something. What's that? Frank lights a cigarette, the flame illuminating his face in the darkness. Remember that Frank Sinatra looked you in the eye and told you exactly what he thought of you. Remember that I didn't beg. I didn't crawl. I made my choice, and I made it standing up. That's more than any of your bosses will ever be able to say. The man leaves, the door clicks shut, and Frank Sinatra stands alone in the dark, smoking his cigarette, feeling the weight of a silence he chose. The next morning, Frank's accounts were unfrozen. The tax audits were canceled. No more photographs arrived in the mail. On the surface, everything went back to normal. But nothing was ever normal again. In the weeks that followed, Frank became a different man. Not broken, transformed. The easy charm was still there when he needed it, but underneath was something harder. Something that had stopped believing in heroes. He stopped talking about politics entirely. When reporters asked about Kennedy, he'd smile and change the subject. When old friends mentioned the campaign, he'd suddenly remember somewhere else he needed to be. In March 1962, exactly 1 year after that night at Pacific Sound, President Kennedy was scheduled to stay at Frank's Palm Springs compound during a California visit. Frank had spent months preparing. New cottages built, helicopter landing pad installed. He was going to show the world that Frank Sinatra still mattered. The visit was canceled at the last minute. Kennedy stayed with Bing Crosby instead. The official reason was security concerns. But Frank knew the real reason. He had been erased, just like the tape. When he got the news, he didn't rage. He didn't throw things. He simply walked out to the helicopter pad he'd built, stood there for a long moment, then picked up a sledgehammer and destroyed it himself, piece by piece, concrete by concrete. He never spoke publicly about what happened in that studio. But people close to him noticed that he kept a single, blank tape reel on a shelf in his study for the rest of his life. When asked about it, he would just smile and say, "That's to remind me what loyalty is worth in this town." One night, one tape. One man who discovered that some truths are too expensive to keep. Frank Sinatra spent his career being the voice that sang truths others couldn't speak. But that night, he learned there are truths even his voice cannot protect. Truths the powerful will crush without mercy. In erasing that tape, Frank didn't surrender. He refused to keep fighting a war already lost. Refused to sacrifice his family for revenge. Refused to let them see him broken. Was that weakness or the hardest kind of strength? Today, most of us will never face men in gray suits, but we face our own versions of that studio. Moments when fighting back could cost everything we love. Frank Sinatra's lost tape vanished into history. We'll never know what was on it. We can only know what it revealed. A man who could have been crushed, but chose to walk away on his own terms. Sometimes courage isn't winning the fight. It's knowing which fights aren't worth your soul, and walking away with your head high, even when the world expects you to crawl. This is the part of Frank Sinatra's story that the spotlight never showed. The night he held power in his hands and discovered that power was holding him all along. This was Frank Sinatra. Legacy Confidential. If this story changed how you think about truth, power, and the price of walking away, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves the real stories behind the legends. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell us in the comments, what do you think real courage is? The strength to keep fighting no matter the cost, or the wisdom to know when walking away is the only victory left? Until next time, keep listening. The real stories are always in the silence between the songs.